Can you hear me, Jake?
Gotcha.
Great. Okay. Welcome in, everybody, to post-game coverage of the Browns and the Chiefs Week 15. The Browns go on to lose to the Chiefs 21-7. I'm joined by Jake Burns. We're going to break this one down following another disappointing loss. The Browns are 3-11. It gets harder and harder to do these every week, Jake, when the story is the same, and it's difficult to come up with new ways of talking about how disappointing it is to watch the Browns play football right now.
Yeah, we are. I think, again, to put it into perspective, we talked about this, I think, at the end of the week, and I don't think it's really been discussed very well, Andrew, that this is the first time as fans we have experienced the Browns do this for a while. Now, we are not new to this by any stretch, these types of seasons, but when you do go a significant amount of time, which 2017 to 2024, that's a nice break from, like, again, the Browns have had non-playoff seasons and they've had 7 and 8 win seasons in there, but to be 3-10 and like really be fighting 4 weeks left in the year for where are they going to draft? What's the best course of action here? What should they do? Should they lose? Like, these times are real challenging for fans. And you remember, a little bit of where you were when they were winless in 16 and 17, but the difference in those situations was there was like a looming sort of gift that you were very optimistic about. Now they're back in the first round and that helps, right? But you do understand that the roster's not this young, upstart, scrappy thing here. This is an older group, not so old, but older group to where we are trying to convince ourselves that this is a 1-year turnaround scenario. And that can get tougher when games like this happen. 6 turnovers, first time that's happened since the return type of thing. And we talked about this, you and I, about what would it take to really like make the seat warm. We keep seeing every week there are these votes of confidence coming out, significant names, not nobody. And we keep seeing it. And we said, earlier again in the week, there was that Devondre Campbell Thursday night, like, oh, this guy quit in the middle of a game. It would probably take some of those things. Well, your offense turning the ball over 6 times, the first time that's happened since 1993, is the type of outlander stuff where an owner gets so frustrated watching it that there are things that can start to become reality that you think, maybe I can sit through this. I can be patient. I can be, a part of this. And it's still Jimmy Haslam in the back of that sort of cranium there. It's still the same guy. Yeah. And you see outlandish performances like this, where I don't think Kansas City was very good, particularly at all in this football game, and you have 6 turnovers and you lose 21-7. I just think that this is the stuff that makes it worse. And on top of what we just said, there's not like, just a gigantic feeling of optimism about like the quarterback class and solving that. There's a lot going on here, but what I would say, Andrew, which is the point of your original opening here, is I don't think anybody's wrong if this is the lowest they've been with the Browns that they can recall, because it's been a while since they've been this bad. And they're putting together some performances here that really make you slam your head against the wall, because it's like, why am I watching this? What am I doing? Why do we care? Like, you get back to that place when the perceived payoff years are supposed to be happening and they're doing this. So I get the irrational processing that's happening right now.
That's a good way of saying it. Yeah. I mean, I think that what's so frustrating about it is that it feels kind of like it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, where we're stuck seeing the same things week after week, feeling the same way week after week, but it doesn't feel like there's a ton of scope for change. And so that part is really, it's very unprecedented to have a team playing this poorly week in, week out, not really having conversations about firing anybody, especially, a head coach and a general manager that have been have been here for a while and had, as you mentioned, high expectations going into the season. And I'm not saying that that's the answer. I'm just saying it's very weird to watch them kind of come out and be, they were competitive early, but they're mostly listless, and it just overall feels like a little bit of a lost season. And it feels weird that there's not going to be any sort of a result to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very much, this is a weird outcome year and we're going to run it back is the message that we keep hearing.
Right.
And usually where we would get to is that seasons like this, not in the first year of a head coach's tenure, maybe like a Brian Callahan in Tennessee or think back to like Kyle Shanahan's first year in San Francisco, or second year, something like that. One of his first years might have been his first year. They were pretty rough. And like, you can start to be like, all right, well, that was bad, but this is the new system process. This is year 5. And it's sort of unprecedented to go, coach of the year and all of that, and have these types of seasons. And we have broken this down where we have said, there are good coaches that have had these types of years. There has been an Andy Reid 4-12, a Shanahan 4-12, a 5-11 for McVay. There was a Belichick had an awful year in the middle of that. But what the thing is, like, what happens on those more often than not, if they're not early in the process, is some sort of significant move. Or if you haven't won something significant as in that regime, to kind of like lean on that crutch. Now, they've been to 2 playoffs for an organization that has only been to 1 outside of their tenure. That does matter. But the question is whether expectations are old expectations or new. And, Jimmy spoke on this a little bit recently, right? Where he said he's perplexing that they're like, the season's going like this. And I think we're all in that sort of, potpourri of people feeling the same way. But the way I kind of view this as, it's rare to see a 5th year of a tenure that you feel good about go this sideways. And I don't think it's not something like, oh, Tom Brady got hurt week 1 and we have to start Matt Castle, even though they still went 5. My general, it's not like something that massive happened to, like, Myles Garrett didn't get hurt here. Right. There's no Denzel Ward and they've got no secondary. There's none of that. Even like last year was that kind of year where you could see like, oh my God, this many injuries, whatever. But for this year to be that bad, this is the type of year where I wrote it up in the pregame notes. Like, the last time the Browns beat Kansas City was in 2012. They had Romeo Crennel and Brady Quinn. And then that year, I think that was they played like week 14. They ended up 2-14, had the first pick, took Eric Fisher, who didn't matter, but they took Travis Kelce in the 3rd round of that next draft, hired Andy Reid, signed Alex Smith, and away you go. Yeah, away you go. Exactly. But my general point is, like, they got Andy Reid because Andy Reid went 4-12 in Philly in his like 10th, 12th year. I don't know the number, but you don't have those type of years this far into it. And see somebody live through it. So I'm not saying, like you were saying, I'm agreeing with you in that it's not to say the answer is firing Kevin, but I do think it is sort of strange to just sit back and be like, shucks, we lost a year, and have no like even thought, because every week it keeps coming out that those guys are safe. And it's like, well, all right, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the weirdest part of this for me is we really put a lot of this on Watson, right? And they make the change away from, the injury forces them to make a change away from Watson.
Yep.
And it becomes this situation where now you think, okay, they're gonna kind of change things, and they're gonna now we're gonna see the team that really they put together, right? And they're gonna turn a corner because they turn around and beat the Ravens that first week. And so the narrative becomes, this is the Browns team that we've all been sort of kept away from seeing because of the Watson experiment, right? And that hasn't really borne out over the course of the next, I think this is this Winston's sixth start overall, right? He had the Ravens and the Chargers, and then back he had the Saints, Steelers, Broncos, Steelers. So 7th, I guess, with the Chiefs. So overall, the feeling is this is still a pretty bad football team, right? And you have the win against the Ravens. You have the win against the Steelers in the snow. You have an offensive explosion against the Broncos, even in a loss, which makes you start to shape this narrative of, okay, so they've figured the offense out and they're on the rise now. And it's just a question of, now the season's kind of lost and maybe everybody's not playing as hard as they should be. But next year you bring Winston back and you have we were talking about this. You have a middle of the road offense, but Jake, a middle of the road offense should have beat the Chiefs today.
No, there's no doubt. This is the second time they've played at home. And I would say that this is the Steelers game felt the same way on the road, but this felt like the Chargers Steelers games where they just can't get to anything that's open. And we'll watch the all 22 and kind of cover whether their things were open and they couldn't get to them, or if there was just a team that felt like they had a good sort of feel for what the Browns were going to do and they couldn't get anywhere they needed to go. But 266 yards on 60 plays, 4.4 yards per play number. I mean, it's
and
not that
62 of
bad,
that
but
on one
62
draw.
on a fluky 2nd and 23 draw, which just works out. So yeah, man, I'm with you on this. The offense has had better moments since Deshaun Watson left. There's no doubt about that. But the point that we were trying to make, and to give him some credit at times, he's made us say this, that like, yeah, Jameis Winston could be a part of the solution as far as maybe another year goes. And we have tracked this all the way back to Jameis's Tampa Bay days about how bad the run game was for him in Tampa, and the burden was largely on his shoulders. And we again did sort of the same thing when we looked at like, well, he hasn't had another chance since then. He had that little 7-game start spurt with the Saints, and he was better. It was like a 14-3 ratio. That's a pretty good ratio. But we haven't dug into those details because we were waiting for him to really prove to us that this audition, which it is an audition for a half a year here, could mean something to him getting time. But he's thrown the football to the wrong team too many times. You cannot, like, I'm not saying Kevin's MO here is like you can't turn the football over. I think it's a large part of his core identity, and I think it's everybody's core identity. But I do feel like the Browns were probably thinking after that maybe Baltimore game where there were some uneven throws that worked out in their favor. All right, well, if this guy can prove to us that he can be the good version of him, and not you can't eliminate the bad version of James, but just keep it in check for large portions of this and be a 3-to-1 ratio guy, right? Could you be like a 21-7, 21-10 ratio guy?
Yeah, that would work.
We will give you a chance to start next year as we sort out what's behind you. There's a lot of Watson coming back noise, which is whatever, or they draft a guy or they sign a guy, whatever. He could be a part of that solution, but you can't do the stuff he's doing. You can't throw the Denver game away. You can't throw the costly interceptions against the Steelers. You did it against the Chargers. You did it here. Like, he's made some good plays, and he has brought a level of consistency to wide receivers going out and catching the football that we haven't seen, which is cool as we watch Jerry Jeudy cross 1,000 yards and clearly is coming into his own. But they cannot run this version of quarterback playback, which puts you in another part of the things we had been feeling good about was like, okay, yeah, man, like, yeah, they're not winning ball games. Defense may struggle here and there or whatever, but the offense can just score, and we feel like they can go into next year with this, whatever, then this can be something that they solve. And now you're kind of back to like, well, Jameis can't be it. This is a problem. So who are they going to sign? What routes are they going to go? And it just kind of opens up a lot more questions. And it's not to the fault of like these guys in house, because I don't think I want to see Dorian Thompson-Robinson play. I've just seen enough of him to see like there's just not a good quarterback and not a consistently good quarterback in there. So I don't have any desire to watch him play. Some people might. I don't have that desire. So Jameis ironically aligns perfectly with like, we need to give the wide receivers volume and chances, but we also need to lose as many of these games as we can, because he ain't helping with the winning aspect of it. So I would just like put it, Andrew, succinctly as they're still further from what we hoped they would be post Watson than I think we initially had anticipated could happen. And Jameis has dropped the ball on this opportunity. Not to say that, again, the run game is not good enough, and there's a large documentary coming from our website on this as the season wraps, and we look at what decisions they make around Kevin and the people calling offensive plays, because it's been into the 5th year now. It's been 3 straight downward trending years with this run game, and is not a part of the solution. But yeah, I just I find myself in this spot of like, where are they going from here, man? Because I don't have a great answer for it. And I think the organization was hoping that this could yield some Winston magic. And it's just like, oh, he's kind of just the same guy. He's just the same guy. And the mistakes are, because today's mistakes were bad. I mean, the first one is rough. He has no idea where the backside safety is and throws a post to Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore's got to be really open for me to give him a post opportunity, because he ain't going up and fighting for it. That's just not his MO. And he missed a curl route on the left side off that run action that was wide open. The second one is just clearly an inaccurate throw to Nick behind him, right? That bounced off the hands. I think that's the second one. The third one is, I need to see it. It looked like he was trying to either throw to Jerry, coming across the field toward the sideline, or he was giving Mike Woods a chance. I don't know, whatever happened there. Trent McDuffie, his note, I know you said after the game of like, he saw the throw on the Jumbotron, and that's when he turned, because I would imagine Jameis saw his back to him, and that's why he threw it. So the third one's not as egregious, but it turns out really bad, and on top of his 2 fumbles. So, I mean, that's it, Andrew. We'll talk about special teams too as cause a problem here, but this is another punch in the gut. That's kind of what I wrote in the game notes about, like, we've taken a bunch of body blows this year, the team and the fans, and like this just kind of adds to it, because now you're left with like, what's the corpse of Kirk Cousins going to look like next year? You could ask that, you know what I mean? Like that's what it's turning into here.
Yeah, that's a very grim way to wrap up that sentiment. Yeah, I mean, I went and looked, and I just to close the book on this line of the conversation. The Browns with Watson this year 1-6. The Browns with Winston this year 2-5. Right, so you've got 7 game samples for each of them. I know Watson got hurt halfway through that Bengals game, but they certainly weren't winning it with him. So that's where they're at, and I think it kind of, to me, does put to rest any idea that this was just about the quarterback. Now, you and I were really leading the charge on how they needed to find a different quarterback and fix that, but part of what has been difficult about the past few games and this newest losing streak is that it reveals the other problems on the team that are deeper and more serious than we wanted to think, probably. So
yeah,
it does now feel like, as you said, you're asking the question of where do they go from here. It also ruined what I think was a pretty strong defensive performance from the Browns against the Chiefs. They got a ton of pressure against Pat Mahomes. The Chiefs' offensive line looks to be a gigantic liability for them going into the playoffs, and if you're talking NFL wide, one of the bigger stories, I think, as we wrap up the season here, how they're going to keep Mahomes upright. He left with an ankle injury. We got to see Carson Wentz snaps in this game, Jake, but
yeah,
it is frustrating when you feel like, as you said off the top, the Chiefs were gettable in this game.
Yeah.
And the Browns had about an offensive effort that should have resulted in about 200 yards if you take that draw out of the question. 200 yards and 6 turnovers against a defense that has not been playing well, especially against the pass recently, it's really tough, and it has to mean something about the organization beyond just the quarterback. This can't just be Winston didn't play well. This is the game plan was bad. This is the offensive line cannot block anybody. You mentioned in the game notes, which can be found, I should mention, at brownsfilmbreakdown.com. You can subscribe there and read Jake's note by note going through everything in these games. I know it's not maybe appealing to go through every piece of information about a 3-11 football team losing a game, but it is the best coverage for this sort of stuff you're going to find anywhere on the internet. So there's a look at what it looks like for you, including some reaction shots from Kevin Stefanski and Ken Dorsey. But there's highlights of the game, all that sort of stuff. You get the snap counts at the end. This is as good as it gets in terms of coverage of the Browns and every one of these games. We hope to be doing more of them about wins. That's a different conversation. But Jake, the idea that the defense did play well and the offense couldn't really do anything to help them out.
Yeah, and the special teams too continues to be a net negative. So you're the defense showing up to play hard. For the most part, they did a nice job. They ended up giving up 132 rushing yards, but there was a really weird, like that Xavier Worthy swing throw resulted in a rush.
Fantasy
statistics.
Players are in an uproar.
Ooh, they're hot about that. So it's like 100 rushing yards in a game that I think that they wanted to run it a lot. They gave Kareem Hunt 13 carries and Pacheco 13 carries, and they like 3 yards per carry. So the run game wasn't that great for them. And Mahomes was 19 of 38. So, 50% on the day. He threw a couple touchdowns. The first one being and I could talk real quick about what happened on both of those. The first one was a Juju Smith-Schuster play action where he's kind of running under the line. We used to call it a slip route where the backfield or gun run action is working to the left and he slides underneath going left to right. And like Martin Emerson's just a second and a half late reacting to Juju running. Maybe his eyes are in the backfield watching the ball split second coming his way, and he can't get the angle to catch Juju Smith-Schuster, which is kind of crazy because he's not a burner or anything. So that touchdown was a man coverage based touchdown where somebody lost a moment's worth of focus, and that's a touchdown. And then the second on that Worthy throw, or the second one actually, I believe, was a throw in the back left corner to Noah Gray. And the Browns covered the initial scheme well. Noah Gray's kind of running a tight end or in an inside alignment, high in the end zone, right to left. And then I think that probably what happens is McLeod, who has him initially, just loses him, and he runs back inside toward the goalpost. And Mahomes extends the play, one of the few that they did not get pressure on.
And that was the Garrett eye poke play too. So
exactly right.
I mean, he during the play took his helmet off and collapsed to the ground. I can't help but imagine that that may have distracted. I mean, in all honesty,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if you're out there playing safety, you've got the entire field and you watch your best defensive player walk off to the side and chuck his helmet.
Yeah.
You know, you might,
It's pretty weird.
you know, your eyes were getting manipulated by something else there. So that was a play that, you know, you never see NFL games blown, you know, plays aren't blown dead for injury.
Yeah.
But that's as close to that sort of an example as you could imagine. And there's obviously competitive balance reasons not to do that. But I did want to just jump in and say that was a weird play because I think half the defense stopped when Myles Garrett reacted the way that he did.
And you can't help but think, like, on that same field, somebody lost an eye. I know it was a flag, but Orlando Brown lost vision in an eye. And like, also you joked about it afterward too, but like the throwing of a Browns player's helmet against the Chiefs, it's maybe Dwayne Rudd memories there. So yeah, it was kind of a weird circumstantial thing. I thought Myles was in way worse shape than what he ended up being as he came back in the game. Had 8 pressures, played a pretty good ball game. It's just Mahomes is one of the hardest guys to get a hold of. That's what makes him like one of one. Him and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are in their own tier because of that very fact. And yeah, to the point of that one, McLeod, I mean, it's tough. It was like a 6-second play. So, I mean, that happens. But then the last one to Worthy, they get him in a similar look against a split backfield where I think it's Pacheco and Worthy. Worthy goes in high motion at the last second. That causes the safeties to switch, exchange, roll down and cover that. And McLeod is man-to-man with Worthy, who's a lot younger and faster than him and doesn't get the angle. And it's a touchdown. But that's like they got him in man coverage for 2 looks they wanted down at the high red zone. And those are touchdowns, right? And that's kind of it. They hit a couple other, plays here and there, a screen play that worked out pretty well for him. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to be mad at the Browns defense. You come out of the gates, it's like everyone's fired up. You get a 3 and out. Travis Kelce's kind of limping a little bit. You're like, all right, man, maybe turn your head sideways a little bit. This could be a game that they can hang around. Yeah. Doing a lot of hays and shoulders. And all of a sudden you get the first punt return and you fumble it. And it's like, the one thing you can't do in this game, and what the Chiefs are banking on, because there's a lot going on for the Chiefs. They are obviously fighting for that 1 seed because they want to get healthier. But they have 3 games in 10 days. They turn around and play Saturday, and then they turn around and play Wednesday on Christmas Day, which we talked about this. They have a really tough schedule coming up, and this game was like one that I think that they were like, we're not doing much to prepare for it other than just doing our basic stuff, taking some tendencies, and we'll give it our best shot. And when you turn it over at the rate that they turned it over, you made it easy for him. And I'm not even kind of including some of the latter ones, like even 3 turnovers was making it easy for him. And you punt it, you give him the football at the 10-yard line, 15-yard line. That to me, like when that fumble happened, I'm like, Browns are losing. They're not going to be able to win these games against a pretty good defense. I know that they've been struggling against the pass lately, but collectively a pretty good defense. And the weather's not great. The rain hit second quarter. It's like, this is going to be hard to score in and of itself. And it proved that way for both teams. And it's just, that's the stuff this year that's happening. And, the special teams being such a drag on this whole operation all year. We talk about how the offense has been bad for large parts of the year and the defense has tried to do what they can to save them. And I don't think the defense has been good enough. And I certainly think the offense has been one of the worst. But when you put in the situation where your your special teams is then adding as one of the worst. I haven't looked at the special teams DVOA. Maybe you have, Andrew. This game did not help that scenario. They had a decent Jerome Ford kickoff return, but other than that, another day of like they're catching footballs at like the 2-yard line on punts. Like they've been doing the same thing. It's been different bodies and the same things all year, and these mistakes that just continually happen for that group. And then on top of that, the kicking has been so putrid. So you say, the only bright spot of the special teams has been like the punter, because he's been getting a lot of work and that's it. But even like the punt team coverage has not been that good this year. So I think they're one of the worst, if not the worst special teams unit, tacking on to one of the worst offenses. And then that's a potpourri of like, even if your defense is somewhere between 15 and 20, it doesn't matter. And that's the difference. Like you said, the difference between this team going into this game being 3-6 or 3-10 or 6-7 or 7-6 is like Giants, Vegas, and the Cowboys, and then there's some other ones, the Broncos, Saints. Like these, Saints, like these games that they should have won playing semi-competent football, and like they can't do this. So I mean, it's just such a microcosm of the season that they let down so often each other. The compliment, and these are basic ways of talking about football, but they have so few times played a complimentary brand of football. They've had bad turnover luck and some bad self-driven turnover issues on top of it. And it's just, I don't know, Andrew, maybe it is a throw your shoulders up and say, we'll see if it flips next year. I do think they're so deep in the water at this point with this group that they are going to do another year, but we'll continue to say that these types of anomaly performances, you are putting yourself, the bullseye gets bigger if you keep doing this sort of stuff. And today was, like we said, and the Dolphins did lose, so that means they care. Their playoff situation is hard. Maybe that game means less to them going south to north, and you get a win there. I don't want one. The Bengals won today. That gets them to 6-8. They're still, so you're talking Bengals, Ravens are going to care a lot, and then likely to care a lot. We'll see what happens with the Ravens, but then otherwise, like that Dolphins game kind of lingers, Andrew. It's not the optimism for all of this is turning into a win. And like at the same time, I don't want them to win because you want them to have a chance at whatever player is available that could matter at the top end of the draft. Because the difference here being, say, maybe the Raiders win 2 games or something along the lines, and Shedeur ends up being the second most likely pick. And then the Raiders say, okay, well, we'll move up with you to get him. And you get a Chicago Bears like Hall where you get a future first or something like that. That stuff matters to turning yourself into a more competent franchise. And I don't want to hand wave away a game like the Dolphins when it's like, yeah, that would be cool. A win would help the vibe, I guess, of the here and now. But at this point, they need as much opportunity and ammunition as they can possibly find.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I mean, it is frustrating when you look at the way that the day played out and the way that the season's playing out, that the Browns are 3-11 and somehow picking 7th. That feels unimaginable that there's 6 teams worse than them, but that's the way it falls as of now.
Well,
We'll
it's
see,
unimaginable
obviously.
because 2 of them, like, they beat the Browns.
Right.
And that's where it's like, oh God, like
Right.
we watched them lose to the Giants and Raiders. And
Yep.
yeah, that's why it's hard. This is such a mind bending season in a lot of ways.
It's very unsatisfying. And I want to kind of touch on 2 things before we wrap up here, because I think we can and we will continue to discuss kind of where this goes through into the offseason and what it means for the Browns to have kind of one of these truly awful seasons. And we'll continue to unpack that. But just 2 other pieces of news that I want to touch on. The first one, really, really bad news about Nick Chubb. Breaks his foot he was either stepped on or was planting. It's hard to tell from the replay. Stefanski thought he might have been stepped on, but it was pretty clear he had x-rays right away and was ruled out. That you kind of knew that was going to be bad, and then Stefanski confirmed it in the postgame. So it's a clear-cut situation where he's out for the rest of the year, and you know that a foot injury is relatively easier to come back from than a knee injury, but you also have to think, Jake, that the 2 are probably related, right? The way that these sorts of injury recoveries and how much stress it puts on your body to come back from an injury like what he came back from that happened last September. It feels like a lot of the work that he's taken over his career is catching up with him. And I just feel so much for the person because of how hard he worked to come back and play for a team that wasn't playing for anything important this year, but he kept working, and you got to give him credit for that. You got to celebrate the player for that. And, he's one of the most important people to this team. It was a blow last year when he went out injured and they needed his leadership and his example, and they didn't have it for most of the season. And it's a different situation here because the season's almost over, but it is also going to be hard to replace him both on the field and in the locker room. So just terrible news for, my favorite Browns player. I'm sure most everybody who's watching's favorite Browns player, and Nick Chubb, going to miss the rest of the season with a foot injury. Should be, we'll see more details come out. Should be back ready to go for next year. But of course, he's a free agent, and so we'll see what that all how that all plays out for Nick as he undergoes another difficult injury.
They got it last year, I think, and how they worked it out to keep him around. I will be very interested to see. I don't think anybody's going to give Nick serious money out there because of now this on top of everything else in your heart. And beyond this stuff, like you said, man, knowing that everything he had to do for rehab and the story he wrote and everything he put into it, his comeback, and then he has to deal. And like you said, comparatively, this is minor. It sounds crazy to say that about a broken foot, but he'll be fine. I mean, he'll be ready to go next year. But you like you said, It's the same thing we talked about with Deshaun Watson with a serious shoulder injury and now an Achilles injury, and a guy who plays the football game the way he does. These things stack up and they change how you play and they change your effectiveness. And guys don't know that the game has passed them by until it's too late often. And the NFL tells them that it's passed them by. And I'm not saying Nick's career is done here. And I'm not even saying that Deshaun Watson can't still play in the NFL in some variety. But what I'm getting at is like, this stuff adds up, and it's just tough, A, for Nick the person to know another rehab is coming, and B, for like what his future looks like. And I hope the Browns do everything they can to keep him. I hope it doesn't happen, God forbid, where someone like the Ravens offer him $1 million more and they goes that, like, those AFC North teams should be looking to kind of do that stuff. Like, they should be. Do the Browns really care about you? Well, we're offering you $4 million and 6 to the incentives. Will the Browns get there? I think he's so important. You got to do what it takes to bring him back for another year or two. But they've put themselves through bad contracts in some spots in such a place that that flexibility is not guaranteed to be there for a place pinching pennies because of other decisions. So I remain fascinated, as grim as that is, about what it looks like for Nick the Browns in the future. And I hope that that is a mesh point, because I think it's safe to say he's the most beloved player since they've come back to this city. So yeah, interested in that. And also just a gut-wrenching thing to see him hurt again like this, because he also needs the reps to trust that knee again. And he was running it fairly well today, and that happened. So it's a big bummer.
Yeah, it is. It's just really hard to stomach. And I agree with everything you said. It will be one of the storylines to watch this offseason, though, because there's plenty of reasons for the Browns to want him back, but it'll be interesting to see what his market looks like elsewhere, because the Browns will, as you said, be pushed to retain a player like that because of their financial obligations elsewhere. 2 other injury updates. Martin Emerson has a concussion, and so that obviously is more of a day-to-day type thing. We'll see how he recovers from that. Shelby Harris has an elbow injury, unclear about the severity there. And then obviously Myles Garrett, as we talked about, got poked in the eye but did return, and so nothing serious there. So I think bad news on the injury front, and it is that situation where when Emerson left, now you're playing Cam Mitchell at outside corner, and then you're moving Miles Harden, you're playing at nickel. So obviously Jake will break down the film on that and tell you how those guys did, but you're down Newsome and then you lose Emerson in game, and all of a sudden you're playing some guys who don't have a ton of NFL experience. I guess from an evaluation standpoint, maybe a good thing, but yeah, it's that end of the season feeling where you're kind of double checking the roster. Like, remind me who that is again? Because the first time I saw Miles Harden today, he was getting trucked by Kareem Hunt. So
welcome to the NFL moment for him there.
Yeah,
that was bad.
He got sat down, but we'll see how he played overall. Have to go back and, as Kevin likes to say, review the tape on that.
I would venture to say, though, Kareem is one of the few guys I would not want to square up with, like in the hole. Like, that guy's got tree trunks for legs, man.
Top of the list, really knows how to get his weight low while keeping forward momentum. Actually, both of their backs, him and Pacheco, are at the top of the list of guys I wouldn't want to meet. Absolutely. It's like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, and then those 2 guys.
Yep.
The last piece of news, Jack McCurry mentioned this in the chat earlier, and I did want to come back to it kind of as we wrap things up here, Jake. This loss drops Kevin Stefanski to 40-41 all time as the Browns head coach. So he, for the first time, I think, since being the Browns head coach, has a losing record. And it's
at least since the first part of 2020 when they were rough, right? Yeah, so it's been a while.
Right. Since he first got here. So it's tough to stomach, and it does kind of feel like, I guess it's not beyond it not being where we wanted this season to go. It's just I just have doubts across the board, I guess I would say. And I didn't think coming into the season that I would be in that spot. And that's
the way to say it. That's the way to say it. We didn't think a world existed where he wouldn't be the coach in 25, no matter really like a transitional year, not maybe meeting expectations, maybe sneaking into the playoffs instead of winning the division. You had aspirations for that, but the season's gone in a way that you feel like a firing is a fair outcome. I mean, I do. It's been that bad. Do I think they should keep them one more year? They extended them. They like them. I definitely don't know all the intricate details of what's going on behind the failure. There's obviously layers to that we will never know, but I find myself with 3 games left thinking they should give them one more year to try to rectify this, largely because I don't really love the Browns situation's lack of clarity for the next coach to come in and feel like optimistic about what's here in terms of like important positions. I think there's some elements there that I feel like another year is wise, but to the general point of this, I feel like they've been so bad that they've put themselves in a vulnerable spot. And the part that's hardest about all of this is that no matter what side you're on, if you want Kevin fired, there's evidence for why you want him fired. And I don't think you're wrong. I think if you do not want Kevin fired, there's ample stuff there that says this is ludicrous to think that you should fire a 2-time coach of the year and a guy who's got to 2 playoffs and a place that's never been there, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that like there's a lot. It is a very, very, very nuanced discussion about this that is difficult to find somebody yielding who's on the opposite sides of the aisle here, because there's just a lot on both sides of it. And that's what makes this decision incredibly, I guess, interesting is the way to put it, because it is like layered with things that we think we know, that we probably don't know, and decisions made by Kevin that we think were made by him, but maybe weren't, or vice versa. So buckle up. 3 weeks of like whatever this is, 3 weeks of the team now 3-11, giving less a care about where this is going. The organization probably doing what we call tanking through the top, which is decisions made around personnel. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see Dorian start a couple games, largely because like this is the situation is like we want to lose. And Jameis is driving the bandwagon, but it takes one Jameis 4 touchdown game against the Dolphins to go from picking 3rd to picking 8th. And that's like, what good does that do for you? So
how does that help? Yep.
I think from the top down, you're going to see strategic ways of losing football games. And what I would say is this: the optimal outcome for the remainder of the season is a group that looks like does the little things right, but comes up on the short end. That's what you should want. It's a sick world, but that's the way it goes.
More like the Denver game.
Yes, right.
Less like the last
hard,
2.
Plays hard, seems to play disciplined game. Less like today's sloppy penalties were so hard to watch. Can you do the little things right, but just get beat? Like that would be the optimal outcome. Does that feel like it's going to happen that often? I don't think so. But what you don't want is like a 13-9 win over the Dolphins or somebody like that. The Ravens pack it in because they have no change to their playoff seeding week 18. Like that outcome cannot happen. You cannot lose the premium nature of this stuff. And I know that you and I were very much, and you wrote on it way back when, or middle of the year, but like winning still matters. But at this point, when you're this deep in the weeds, the switch is flipped. And totally. I just hope that there's a group understanding about what that looks like, because again, go back and, sometimes benevolence happens out of these things where you look at the Texans and the CJ Stroud thing, but this isn't the draft class where that sort of stuff is in play. And I'm just fascinated by how it looks. You mentioned some of those guys that were dinged up after the game. Like to me, the only thing that can happen the rest of the year that's bad for Myles Garrett is he gets hurt and it lingers into next year. Like some of these guys, like, I don't want to see them really. I just don't. I want to see young guys play, and that play hard.
That was the thought at the front of your mind when Garrett went down.
Yeah.
The way he reacted, the way he hit the floor was, at this point, if you do something, to a knee, God forbid, to a leg, whatever, you're talking about 12 months of rehab. You're talking about missing the start of the season.
Yeah.
And as you just said, absolutely rightly, the Browns should lose the rest of these games. And I think, people might be listening to this and listening to the way that we started the show and saying, well, hold on. At the beginning, you were upset that they lost. Now you're saying you want them to lose. What you said, Jake, about how they're playing is the key here, right? And it is an incredibly tough needle to thread. The reality is that the coach and the players should want to win. They should be out there trying to win. And as you mentioned, it's decisions you make about personnel that allow you to lose these games while still playing hard. Yeah. And so first and foremost, if Myles Garrett doesn't play for this team the rest of the season, 1, he can't get hurt, and 2, the defense looks completely different.
Right. Yeah, or Denzel's something comes up.
Right.
You got 3 games left, which isn't nothing. That's 21 days start to finish of game. Like you wish this was more like 2 or 1. And I know processing out kind of everything around this in terms of we haven't been here in a while. And I say that very sort of gingerly because it's not like we've never experienced it. It's just been a minute. But I just will say, I promise you that 5 and 12 does not feel any different in the middle of February than 3 and 15 or whatever, 3 and 14, whatever that number is. Like the thing you will care most about is how high they have a selection to take a guy you really want. And I will say too, like 3 and 13s or 3 and 14s over the history of the league, there have been teams that turn it around year to year. Certainly not far from impossible, and they can do it. So like, again, these games at the end of the year where, you flip on the games on Sunday and you want them to win, and that's just our DNA. But I'm just saying, man, those games don't mean much. You just want them to be respectable, well-disciplined, and like have a, you do want them to believe. And that's where we go with the idea that strategic tanking happens at the top level, and hopefully they figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I wish Miles could have gotten that 100th sack today, because I guarantee you he wants that this season. He doesn't want to have to wait all offseason to get that 100th sack. He'll get it next week against Joe Burrow. That's a virtual lock. But it would, I think, if he had gotten that, maybe you make the case, Miles, listen, man, you got the foot thing, you got this cold, you get poked in the eye, take a few weeks off. So we'll see how that stuff develops. As you said, these players that catch these injuries late in the year, it maybe just makes the most sense to sit them down and let them get healthy. And so that does, then you're playing depth players. It makes it easier to kind of, like you said, tank from the top. So that's what we'll be keeping an eye on this week as we go along. Obviously, we will be back with full breakdowns of both the offense and the defense on brownsfilmbreakdown.com, the full film review, both sides of the ball. And we'll have podcasts throughout the week, recapping the loss to the Chiefs and then getting you ready for a divisional game against the Bengals on Sunday in Cincinnati. So stay tuned, both here on the podcast feed and then also at brownsfilmbreakdown.com for everything we've got at both places. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you to Jake for joining me. Be well, everybody, and go Browns.
Go Browns.